Good morning, everyone. I think we can get started now and allow more people to join along the way. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar by the Institute of Economic Affairs. My name is 𝐊𝐞𝐧𝐲𝐚'𝐬, and on behalf of the IEA, I'm very pleased to welcome you to our discussion this morning, where we'll be focusing on assessing the implementation of Kenya's EGP system, looking at the policy options and reform priorities. So we have conducted a brief preliminary analysis of the data available, and we'd like to share our insights and also get your feedback on basically the status of the rollout of the EGP. So I work for the Institute of Economic Affairs, and the IEA is a public policy think tank whose mission is to inform decision-making and create platforms for informed dialogue. We undertake research and facilitate evidence-based dialogue, and we work across 6 program areas, from public finance management to law and the economy, international trade and development, economic regulation, and competition policy. We also focus on futures and foresight and work around popular economics. So in a nutshell, that's the nature of our work. And we've been implementing a project on Kenya Institutional Strengthening. It's under the Kenya Institutional Strengthening Program that is supported by UK International Development, or the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. And so with their generous support, we are able to convey these discussions to advance issue-based policy discourse or expand issue-based policy discourse in Kenya. So for purposes of today's meeting, the presentation that we have prepared will be made by myself and my colleague, 𝐊𝐞𝐬𝐬. Leo also works in the Constitution Law and Economic Program at the IEA. So we can get into the presentation. Leo, have you taken it down?
No, it's up. It's up.
Oh, sorry, it had disappeared from my screen. Okay, so we can get into the presentation. And in terms of the outline, yes. So the outline of our discussion today is I'll do a brief introduction to the issue. So the policy problem around implementation of the EGP. Then we will look at, I'll mention briefly some political economic constraints, although Leo will discuss in detail later. And then I'll discuss the legislative and institutional framework supporting EGP and the gaps around there. And then we will dive into the main issue on helping everyone understand what the EGP seeks to change. So basically a comparison of the system so far, the manual system that has been in place vis-a-vis what the EGP is intended to change. And then we will discuss our assessment of the extent of the rollout of the EGP so far, following the orders for mandatory or full implementation, the full rollout. And then lastly, we will conclude with our insights in terms of policy recommendations of what should change if this system is to be properly operationalized. So that's basically the outline of our discussion. Yeah, and so I'll start and then Leo will come in. So in terms of the policy issue, I think we are all aware that last year around April, the National Treasury there have been many attempts to operationalize the electronic government procurement system, but in April last year it was launched with the advice that by July or in the current financial year, there'd be a full and mandatory rollout and compliance by all procuring entities. The reason why is basically, or the reasons that were advanced was basically to make the public procurement system more efficient, bearing in mind that public procurement accounts for over 60% of the utilization, or supports over 60% of the utilization of the national budget, which is about could be between 7 to 11% of our total GDP. And again, the reasons that were given for this or by the Treasury, in addition to the fact that it's supposed to make it efficient, we were trying to move away from a manual system that has been prone by many problems, the biggest being abuse of discretion, because with the manual system, there could arise, or there have arisen, so many problems. When we talk about abuse of discretion, all the users of the system have a lot of leeway, or yes, white space to claim all manner of issues, from forgery of documents, lost files, however you would describe it. It's just provided a great avenue of abuse. So on the one hand, the wide discretion by users of the system, and then the system in itself, given that it's prone to user discretion, then a lot of the processes therein lack the high standard of transparency. So that system has had many opaque processes, which the EGP sought to address. And so the Treasury's goal was to shift from that discretionary paper-based system to a rule-bound and digital transparency, where everything is on a platform that is easily accessible, that provides a clear audit trail. Remember, again, with this manual system and the processes and the paper trail, it would be very easy to destroy evidence for audit. And so it would eventually, or essentially, the use of the EGP would provide a lot of sunlight into the processes of procurement. So that was the Treasury's intent, and we'll come to the issues around the issues following the use of the mandatory use of the EGP. Remember, the nature of the procurement system is established in our laws, so our constitution as well as the public procurement laws, and I'll come to the challenges around that. But the Treasury basically called for full implementation, and there was a circular to operationalize that, which was reiterated by the PPRA, calling for mandatory observance of that. So we can go to the next slide. So in our assessment, we wanted to understand what would be to provide some guiding questions that would help anyone trying to assess the rollout of this, of the adoption of the system. And so the main questions that we were focusing on was these four. So first, what is the current state of EGP adoption across procuring entities and suppliers in Kenya? Two, which EGP modules are functional and to what extent are they being utilized? Three, what institutional, technical, and behavioral factors explain the low adoption of specific EGP modules? So still bringing in some element of political economy analysis. And then how can Kenya transition to a fully operational, legally compliant, and inclusive EGP system? While still here, I'd like to mention that the reason why, and in the PA analysis that Leo will talk about later, he will expand further. The reason why we have not had the full rollout as was intended is, of course, following a court ruling, because you all know that that full rollout was challenged by the Council of Governors, and they secured a decision to halt it for some time. And we also had the opposition by Parliament on the other side. So to be able to understand the gaps that have allowed this, the reasons that have been provided, or that have basically caused the full rollout of the EGP to be challenged was the current state of our law. So we know that the Public Procurement Act as it is currently does allow for use of both or submission of documents through a manual system. So it's basically, they cited the legal loophole under Section 77 of the Public Procurement and Assets Disposal Act, which still permits manual submissions and could allow an entity to bypass the digital system. So on the one hand, that was a claim by both all the opponents of the system, if I would call them that. So Parliament on the one hand, the Council of Governors, and then there is a number of structure and infrastructural barriers that they have also claimed in terms of the infrastructure distribution that allows for the use of this system and the technical capacity. This is not a claim by the Council of Governors. So it is, from our assessment, there are some deep political issues that have facilitated or created this problem, because even though the law does in fact state that the preferred system that should be used, entities should move towards using a digital system. But the fact that there's still that mention of a manual system, then the claim has been that members of parliament must first regularize or harmonize the law to remove that if you are to fully use the EGP system. And then the Council of Governors and the counties that have had many issues with adopting the system have also claimed that they have not been fully trained, they do not have the infrastructure around it, and therefore the use of that system would be discriminatory. The full requirement to have all suppliers and all users using that system would lock out different entities from using it, which is a violation against our constitution. So coming back to the presentation, now in terms of the legislative and regulatory foundation for this, and I've already mentioned, so the overarching law here is the Constitution under Article 227, which calls for the use or mandates the use of a fair and transparent public procurement system that is competitive and cost-effective. And yes, transparent, of course, should allude to the entities using or moving towards the most transparent option available, which in this case would be the use of a digital system. And then as to operationalize this article, we do have the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act, obviously laying the entire foundation of public procurement processes, the institutional roles, and sets out the institutional roles and responsibilities and the policy responsibilities of in terms of laying the framework for procurement policy. This is assigned to different entities and also provides a basis for how an electronic or open procurement system would look like. So Section 2 describes a procuring entity as any public entity that is engaged in procurement or asset disposal, implying all entities that use public funds are termed as procuring entities and therefore should use the system that is prescribed by the law. Then Section 77, as I'd mentioned, permits both the manual and electronic submission of procurement documents, and this has been the loophole that has created part of this or aggravated part of the problem that we have today. Then, in addition to the acts and the constitution, we also have accompanying regulations. So the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Regulations of 2020, which specify minimum institutional requirements for procuring entities and segregates duties and authorization protocols. And then Regulation 54 in particular mandates that all procuring entities must be registered on the EGP system and possess the requisite capabilities to conduct the entire procurement lifecycle electronically. So while on the one hand, we still have a provision for manual processes, you can see that the spirit of the Act is basically to move towards an EGP system, and which is why we have in regulation more specific requirements for how this should be done. And then in terms of the institutional roles, the National Treasury is empowered to design, to prescribe, and to monitor the implementation of the EGP system, while PPRA is to provide the oversight required to ensure adherence to the standards and guidelines. So basically, this framework integrates digitization into the procurement architecture and provides that foundation that should support procurement transparency and efficiency. We can go to the next slide. So just in addition to now what the legal basis of the EGP is and the procurement generally, in terms of the institutional roles, we have the National Treasury that is responsible for the system design. So this, and here we are referring to the EGP system, registration of procuring entities, and just ensuring that accounting officers are appropriately authorized to use the system. Treasury is also supposed to oversee the integration of the EGP with any other financial management system, right now being the IFMIS, to ensure that seamless workflow and the payment tracking. Then other institutions that have relevant roles here are obviously the procuring entities. They should be over, including schools that are 30,000, we had 4,000. We have upwards of 40,000 procuring entities right now, given the strict definition of what a procuring entity, being any office that uses public funds. So they are all supposed to register on the EGP system, and they have the responsibility to prepare their annual procurement and disposal plans, execute all procurement activities, and to have the accounting officers, a procurement function headed by professionals. So basically, to also have a fully operational procurement committees that as stipulated in Section 44 of the Act. Then another important unit for procurement in terms of institutions, the heads of procurement or the system administrators. So within all procuring entities, we have heads of procurement who should act as system administrators, and they are responsible for basically registering users and assigning roles to maintain the system's integrity. And then lastly, the other major institutions here are the suppliers, and suppliers as well are required to register on the EGP to participate. And this is where we are having governors claiming that it is discriminatory to require suppliers and all users to register on this platform in areas that do not have access to internet provisions. So apparently there are places in Kenya where the internet infrastructure would not allow, according to the governors at least, sufficient use of this or easy use of the system by all suppliers, from the major to the micro suppliers. Then the system verifies supplier information through integration with the iTax, the BRS, that's the Business Registration Service, and the Integrated Population Registration System to ensure compliance and authenticity. So we can move to the next. So the next part of this is basically our assessment of what is the extent of the EGP rollout. Go to the next slide. And here we've done a quick, just an overall highlight or summary of the system that we have now. So the manual system basically, and looking at the EGP system, and tried to compare what the differences are, because the differences can tell you why the resistance that we see or term as mostly political. So the main areas of change are what is in the first column, and then So we start with the transaction method. So in this, so the manual system is basically manual. It's paper-based. So we have tender documents, bids submitted physically through paper. And then for the EGP, it seeks to move this to an end-to-end system that is electronic workflows, end-to-end electronic workflows with the timestamped submissions, secure storage, and automated audit trails. So as I had mentioned earlier, you can already see one risk with that the EGP was trying to solve, to secure and ensure that we have a clear and well-secured audit trail. And so you would see why any resistance to the system, especially at least with even this first area, is currently happening. And then the second area is on decision making. So the current manual system basically allows, and I already spoke about this, allows procurement officers with wide discretion through all the stages of the procurement cycle. So this is from pre-qualification of bids evaluation, awards, and so it can allow for selective application of criteria in order to determine who qualifies for a bid. But then the EGP system was seeking to move to specifically rule-bound processes that have preset evaluation templates, scoring matrices, so effectively reducing the discretion that was in the old manual system. It has automated compliance checks and system-triggered approvals. So, of course, this reduces the discretion by the procurement officials. And then the third issue is with regards to transparency, how the two systems compare. So under the manual system, while tenders should be advertised as widely as possible, sometimes this was not done or done in a way that would limit circulation, or who is able to see the bids that have, the calls that have been circulated. So bids opening have been opaque in most instances, and the selection of awards was disclosed very selectively. And then the EGP system sought to move to real-time publication of tenders. Bid opening minutes would be provided even on the platform, together with integration with the Public Procurement Information Portal. That's the PPIP for public visibility. Then the fourth area that the EGP is changing is thinking around the system integration. So the current manual system has fragmented ERP platforms where we do not see any clear link between procurement, budgeting, and payment, as well as in many instances with the manual system and the paper trails, we could have data duplication. So the EGP seeks to move, or has moved to, a fully integrated procurement ecosystem with the IFMIS for budget controls, or at least that is what was intended, and also full integration with the PPIP for transparent reporting. Then the fourth area, is this the fourth or the fifth? I think the fifth is on supplier management. So here the manual system has separate agency lists, duplicates, dead suppliers in some instances, fake or ghost firms, identity fraud, while the EGP system seeks to, or has moved to, central validated supplier databases that would link the business registry, the taxman, the eCitizen platform. So basically provides a clear link. Then the other area that the EGP would be changing is in terms of collusion detection. Of course, with the manual system and the volume of transactions that is associated with the current system, with the old system, it would be hard to detect bid rigging and abnormal pricing patterns would not be very visible. So what the EGP system seeks to change in this regard is to provide a digital footprint that would enable a bid pattern analysis. And it would also detect abnormal price detection and provide supplier network mapping. Then the next area is on contract management. So basically, with the manual contracts, we've had, and this has been shown even in the Auditor General's reports, poor monitoring, inflated invoices, ghost deliveries, and no link between performance and no clear link, at least, between performance and payment. While then EGP system seeks to automate the contract lifecycle with electronic signing. Payment should also, at least this was even a suggestion from IEA right from the beginning, when the EGP was being conceived, that one of the things that should make or would facilitate greater disclosures of procurement information and would be to ensure that payments are only triggered by full disclosure the whole way, full compliance and full disclosure of all the procurement documents, both on the PPIP and now on the EGP. So the EGP sought to address this or to operationalize this by making sure that payments are linked to full disclosures. Then traceability is the next area. So with the manual system, obviously paper trails can be altered. I've already spoken about that, but now we have an immutable audit trail that is does not allow tampering or manipulation. And then on supplier access, so the manual system, on the manual system, small suppliers faced barriers accessing tenders and favoritism, while the EGP has tried to ensure nationwide online access. And of course, with the publicizing of this information widely or circulating of this information widely, it's supposed to bring on board as many people as possible, even though part of the claim of the persons opposing or the entities proposing the EGP, part of the claim has been that it's discriminatory to small suppliers who are not able to use the system. But in real essence, it's actually, in another way, you could look at it as being better for the micro suppliers. Then the last area is on the procurement cycle time. So the old system had long delays in many instances due to that manual file circulation and approvals, while the automated or the EGP system has automated sequential workflows, notifications, and time-bound approvals. This is not to say that a digital system, maybe we must say this early enough, that it's not to say that a digital system solves all problems, but from a quick assessment, you can tell that the difference between the manual system and the EGP system, even though it's definitely not perfect, there's a big move. You would weigh the EGP system would weigh more preferably compared to the old system in terms of transparency and reducing the risks for manipulation, and basically would provide a more efficient system in that regard. So that is it in terms of what the EGP is changing. I think, yes, I'll allow my colleague Leo to come in now and discuss the actual system itself, going into the modules. So Leo.
Yes, thank you so much, Jackie. And yes, to reiterate what Jackie has just said about the technology, it's not that technology will not solve the human element problem. And because ordinarily, but technology is bringing something important. When somebody, for example, uses pictures of a building from 3 years ago and uploads them on the system, it will be known who uploaded those pictures. But it does not say actually that the gaming that normally goes on with public procurement in Kenya will end. But it will provide a way that this will allow that this will allow to be flagged. So technology is an important element that allows the management of those problems. So these are several. There are several modules. There's a supplier registration module, the annual procurement plan module, the disposal plan module, the e-tendering, the e-auction, and then the contract management module, and then the e-catalog module. So the various modules are supposed to allow government to allow government agencies to be able to provide services in services. So the first question we looked at is the question of statistics. So we asked ourselves, and this is available on the EGP platform. So one thing that we noticed is that there are 33,000 as of yesterday, 33,962 suppliers registered, 1,494 procuring entities registered. Remember that, as Jackie indicated, we have procuring entities in upwards of more than 40,000. Additionally, we only saw that 3,091 tenders have been published. To give context, remember when the IEA did the Public Procurement Risk Index, which is available on our website, one of the things that we found out is that a disclosure of around 45,000 contracts amounted to close to 9%, 9%, meaning that if you do 100%, you'd expect to see at least close 1 million contracts or more on an yearly basis. Sorry. So if you see 3,091 tenders have only been published, that tells you the level of the extent on which this order from National Treasury has been complied with. And then obviously auctions, 0, and then contracts, 0. Remember that the Public Procurement Assets and Disposal Act and the Constitution requires that these contracts need to be published and publicized. The EGP platform is supposed to provide an automatic way of which these contracts will be available. But one thing that we see, even already what those tenders that have been issued, no contract has been disclosed on the platform, which is still a big problem to dealing with procurement fraud. The second issue is that we started to look at one of the most positive things about the EGP platform is that automatic where it allows the platform when the platform to check documents from other government agencies, so that there is a popular term in Kenya called kuchonga, which is from the literature, which is forging documents. But one thing that you start to see is that the EGP platform automatically verifies PIN, identity documents, NCA certificates, ACPO certificates, and other things directly from the other. So that is one of the positive things that you see. The second question is the annual procurement plan module has seen some level of moderate use, even though contracts pursuant to the court order, more contracts have not been published. And then the disposal plan limited And the question about also the auctions platform is also limited. There are very few tenders. The e-tendering module, they are evidenced by that 3,091 tenders out of possibly, because it would be half year, you'd expect at least 500,000 tenders to be on that platform. But you see only 3,091 tenders. That shows you that the compliance rate is less than 1%, which is a big problem. And I've already spoken. The one thing that I need to emphasize on this slide is the question about the contract management. The big problem to procurement fraud, to the procurement fraud that has caused all these manner of the procurement fraud, is the question about contract management. Once contracts are issued, it's difficult to assess performance, to assess performance. And even the Auditor General, given the resources that are available, might not be able to look at those 1 million contracts and be able to confirm, for example, whether some certain service was supposed to be delivered and whether that service would be delivered. So what they normally do is that question of sampling. The contract management module would have allowed that would allow that archive to be available, because there are many other elements that would allow, because of that, the archive, the record, providing the record of which at every stage, once servicing of that contract has reached, say, 50%, 85%, and 100%, and government has been able to meet all those requirements. So, but what you see is that execution is offline, and that is it defeats the purpose of the system. Because if you cannot ensure traceability from when those resources, from the annual procurement plan, all the way to that contract management, and the last part, which is the commissioning. For example, if it's an hospital, that commissioning, you cannot guarantee traceability, and it defeats the purpose of having a platform, because this EGP system will then be similar, without a contract management module, would then be similar to the current PIP. So that is a big takeaway that I think as Kenyans we need to understand, and as professionals we need to understand that if there is no traceability from when the resources are budgeted all the way to that contract execution to the end, then the purpose of an EGP platform is been defeated. So we need to discuss the questions about procurement, political economy, because the big question that is seen from this is the political economy. When we were looking at the data and also looking at the platform, we discovered that internet that would allow you to access WhatsApp on your phone would be enough for you to access the EGP platform. That means with 2G level internet, you'd be able to access that platform. So the technical component, that the arguments fall flat. So the second question that we need to understand from the genesis, the big problem with public procurement is that it's a larger part of Kenya's budget. It's also seen, it can be a fiscal instrument, which means government can use to meet the objective of providing public goods and services, and also meeting constitutional obligations, like, for example, Article 53 obligation on giving all children mandatory basic education. But the big question, that the unseen fact, is that this is a patronage mechanism. Public procurement is a patronage mechanism. And that's why from the national government to county governments and other agencies, you see political power moves in place. And then the persistent inefficiency reflects the political economy problem. It's not necessarily an administrative failure, because if you look at the intended purpose of EGP, which is an end-to-end system that allows budgeting, the annual procurement plan, all the way to contract management, that in itself is a level of competence. But when the execution of contract management goes offline, it changes. So it's a problem of it's a political economy problem. It's not an administrative failure problem. And that's so there. The key three things that the IE has observed in the past when studying procurement fraud is that Kenya's public procurement is volumetric. You have 1 million contracts. So there are many contracts. So an approach to deal with that is not to per se say, for example, investigations, because you will not be able to investigate sufficiently those 1 million contracts and be able. It's a preventive approach that is important. Second question is the lack of inadequate transparency. It's the inadequate transparency. And that's a big problem, including from how contracts are varied, how they are issued, how the performance is done, terminations, all manner of things, even payments, what stage payments are given. So there's a problem of transparency. And the big problem that even Jackie has explained is a question of discretion. Accounting officers have a bigger sway in how those tenders are issued. So just to give nuance to our audience, one time is when we were looking at the audit reports, discovered that, for example, when somebody says lowest responsive bidder, it does not necessarily mean the individual with the lowest number of, with the lowest price, with the lowest price. It actually means if a rule like pagination was to be put into context, it actually means the guy who paginated, who made that rule, and now with the lowest number, with the lowest price. So you see the way rules are varied in a way that allows abuse. So that's the discretion. And the way the system limits is that it first allows the Auditor General to be able to see who is this individual who made that decision. Something that necessarily is not something that in the past would have been known. Another question is the question about manipulation, the qualification rules, the subjectivity of evaluation. And then the question of inflated contracts. I don't need to belabor this. There's been a sufficient reporting around this. The question about collusive bidding. So one of these reading in the news is you find that one firm is invited to do an RFQ, but it's the same person who has been invited to do. 3 firms have been invited to do RFQs, but that would be the same person doing the same RFQ. So it's the same person competing against each other. So there's an element of collusive bidding along, and because of the nature of procurement, the nature of public procurement rules. And then information fragmentation across MDAs. If you go to the Public Procurement Risk Index, you will be able to see that when we took all the data, all the 9% of all those contracts that were disclosed, we're able to see, for example, one firm having more than 100 contracts. No one can remind me, but it was one firm having a bigger number of contracts across universities, state corporations, ministries. So yeah, so that aspect of ex-ante coordination is a problem. And then another thing is the ghost suppliers and payment mismatches. So a firm has not done 50% of the work, but has been paid 100%. So it disincentivizes those similar firms to give to maintain it disincentivizes the same firm to complete the work. So the EGP, the big question that the EGP is bringing forward is that redistribution of power away from procurement officers and political intermediaries. One, how? It provides, it constrains that discretion through automated rules. Because another thing that we've not seen and we'd like to see is the overrides. Because if there are no overrides in the system, it would be difficult to expand that discretion. The second question is creating the audit trails that raise detection risk. And then the third question is centralizing procurement data across institutions. So it allows some level of, so for example, the CS National Treasury, who is empowered under Article 225 of the Constitution to be able to check for the control of public money, can be able to say, for example, let's see which is the most expensive bottle of water that was bought across the Republic, by just because it's the level of centralization that it provides. And then, so in the past, some other firms were given allowances to say, for example, bid even without, say, tax compliance, for example. Which for us, we think that should not be a rule, but tax compliance or a question like specific documents like NCA certificates. Some of them could be expired. Firms were allowed to bid because that level of, because it was discretion and it is paper trail. And the risk of detection, if there are 1 million contracts and the Auditor General would check at best, say 50,000, the probability of detection was low. And therefore, at that time, so EGP is bringing these constraints into play. So by redistributing that political power from the accounting officers and the intermediaries, you start to see resistance. And the political, we are not surprised, given the political economy lens that we've taken, we are not surprised to see the reason why that resistance is in place. Remember, so for example, the big question that has been mentioned even in the press is that there's no internet. There's no internet, but this platform can allow even access on 2G, same level of internet that you require, for example, to access WhatsApp. So infrastructure constraints, capacity gaps, that one can be solved through training. SME exclusion risks. SMEs can now be able to look at contracts national, not just within a specific place. Remember that. So I was reading one of the studies on 𝐒𝐲𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐿, and one of the things that the study found is that 𝐒𝐲𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐿 is an urban feature. Its majority of beneficiaries are within urban areas. So this allows level of democratization. But the underlying driver is that the bigger question is the loss of that ability to predetermine contract allocation, and also that partial adoption of so this partial adoption is not something that to be admired. The EGP should be a whole of society success. Then the EGP success would work if political incentives change, not technical readiness alone. Because already what we see from the news and also looking at the EGP platform is that trainings of procurement officers continue. All the trainings, the capacity gaps, the Northern Fiber project that was building was taking internet to all counties continue. There's also another. So the question of internet, the question of infrastructure constraints, and also these capacity gaps that they claim is being solved over time. And then so the key risks to EGP success is that this selective enforcement. So for example, by taking away the contracting module, the contract management module, that in itself is a risk, a bigger risk. And then what Jackie spoke about, parallel procurement channels. So the law allowing the two to go hand in hand. And then the digital replication of discretion. So the override. So, and this is something that information is still scantily available when we evaluated this, when we wrote the briefing paper. But that is something that we want to see. Who has the overrides over the system? Who can give exceptions? And what are those exceptions? And we think Parliament, the National Treasury should write the rules on exceptions and be able to say and be able to make it to make it work. So the problem is the political incentives. The technical readiness is something that I think would be figured out. So there are legal problems that need to be sorted out. The twin channel for manual and digital procurement systems. I think that is a problem that needs. At what level is digital, is manual allowed? Because that would be an exception. The rule should be that the mainstream procurement policy for Kenya is that all procurements should be on the digital platform. But the exceptions should be on very, very limited circumstances. But at the present, the reading of the Public Procurement Assets and Disposals Act is that the two can go hand in hand. The second question is the end-to-end automation. And here, including the 𝐒𝐲𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬 platform, but also the contract management platform. The contract management here includes what happens after the contract has been issued and what happens so that tender is already the tender is comes to a conclusion and successfully. The third question is price benchmarking. The law provides that public procurement regulatory authority gives what we call a market index, and that market index is a price by a price by region, by specific regions, on a price by specific regions. So the general idea is that risk index, that price index should be also be part of the EGP platform, so that it allows prices, so that, for example, I don't claim that the pen in 𝐒𝐲𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐞𝐬 and the pen should be 1,200, or and while it costs 20 shillings on the platform. So that's the general idea, that if you don't allow the price index to fully work and to be able to cut the corners be able to cut out those shortcuts that people already used in the past, that would be something to welcome. So, but how can political incentives change? And part of the process, by us hosting a platform like this, we are starting that conversation to show the benefits, the weaknesses of EGP, so that political discussion can, that policy discussion can take place, so that it informs the discussion in public affairs. Thank you so much, Jackie.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot, Leo. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. And at this point, we'd like to open up this session to your feedback in terms of what are your views, or if you sit in a place where you have access, or if you've interacted with the EGP system and have separate insights, we'd like to hear them in terms of what are your views. Does our assessment reflect yours, or do you have any contrary or similar views? We'd also like to open this to any questions that you might have. What we have, Leo and I have prepared a paper summarizing this assessment so far. It's a working paper. We will be engaging subsequently with the institutions that I mentioned earlier that are responsible for EGP implementation to also gather their views, because the information and data that we have presented is publicly available, provided on the EGP platform itself, but also our extraction of information from the National Treasury and the PPRA. But we'd also like to engage them in a conversation on our insights and also your views on how we can navigate the challenges that we have raised here. So if anyone has a question, I'd like to invite you to raise your hand. I will see it and allow you to ask your question. And you can also type in your question on the platform here, as if you are more comfortable that way. So as you prepare to ask your oral questions, I see Bildad Joash had asked 3 things. So the first, to what extent is Kenya's EGP system fully mandatory across MDAs and counties? And where are the biggest compliance gaps in practice? Then the second part of the question is, when procuring entities bypass the EGP system, what enforcement mechanisms exist? And how frequently are they actually applied? And then lastly, given Kenya's high domestic and external borrowing, how critical is procurement reform, especially the EGP, to improve fiscal consolidation and debt sustainability? Before we provide answers to Bildad, would anyone like to make a comment or ask a question? You can raise your hand. Okay, so as you prepare to ask any questions, maybe I can start by responding to Bildad's questions. So the first question, in terms of to what extent it's fully mandatory and the biggest compliance gaps. So according to the National Treasury's directive last year, they intended for the system to be fully rolled out. So it was intended to actually be 100% mandatory compliance for all procuring entities, the 40,000 of them. Now, while the intention has been for it to be mandatory across both the national and county governments, the practice has been, and Leo has shown you, has demonstrated a screenshot of our assessment of just logging into the EGP platform itself. You can see practically how many entities have interacted with it. You can see, I think it showed that the suppliers are 33,000, procuring entities currently interacting with it are 1,400. Out of the possible over 40,000, we only have 1,400 there. And then we've only had 3,000 tenders that are recorded there. 0 contracts, which again tells you that is a violation by all of them, actually by all procuring entities, because it cannot be that there has been no issue of contract by procuring entities, even in this current financial year that started in July of last year. We cannot possibly have 0 contracts if there was at least even partial compliance. So in prima facie, that is how it looks in terms of the current compliance, but it's supposed to be full and mandatory. However, you do know that that was halted by, first of all, Parliament threw out or trashed the PPRA circular that was issued following the National Treasury's circular, based on the reasons that Leo and I spoke about. They said that PPRA is in no position as well to issue directives that would suggest statutory changes, because them directing full compliance would suggest that they are amending the statute that still allows for the manual use. So that was on the one hand, and then the court also halted the full implementation following the request by the Council of Governors. So right now, the use has been low, and basically they have that leeway, or that there's that loophole in the law that has, as I mentioned, that has allowed that. So in terms of which entities are complying a little better than others, at this point, and based on the information that is publicly available, we have not disaggregated, and it's not very easy to tell. And that is why we need to have the conversation with the National Treasury and PPRA. But you can already tell that all of them are in violation of different parts of or use of the EGP. Yeah. Then the second part of your question was the enforcement mechanisms and how often these are applied. So because IEA has been working on work around public procurement and the market for procurement fraud for a while now, and we developed a procurement index earlier, as Leo mentioned. Part of our interaction at the time with procuring entities or different offices, particularly if I would mention county executives and county governments. So the claim here, they seemed to suggest that given that there are actually no real sanctions in law for full, for violating or not providing the disclosures that are required by the PPADA, there are no sanctions that, and so basically there's very little incentive for full adoption on their part. So they were saying that they would use some innovative ways to try and to make sure that even the procuring departments within their own entities follow or adhere to the law, but that is just out of their own goodwill. And so they were talking about things like ensuring in their own, as part of their own performance evaluation for the procurement departments, they would check to what extent they've provided or they've made disclosures required to the public procurement information portal. I'm sure right now, even with the EGP and the fact that it is not mandatory, it's again dependent on goodwill so far. that is why we have the challenges that we see here. So part of the recommendation would obviously be to ensure that the language in once the law has been harmonized, the public procurement and asset disposal law has been properly reviewed and harmonized, to also ensure that there are consequences. Of course, there are indirect consequences for continuous violation. Say, for instance, if the Auditor General consistently issues adverse audit reports for an entity, or disclaimer of audit opinion is provided for an entity, there should be the OHG can raise those red flags, and then the law does allow for some indirect consequences where I know the CS Treasury, the National Treasury is allowed to stop funds from getting into an entity that continuously violates financial laws. But in practice, the utilization of this has been little to none. So that I would say in summary that the sanctions for bypassing the EGP are very rare and limited. And so basically, yeah, that weak enforcement environment has reduced the incentive for adoption. And your last question is on the debt pressures and how critical EGP is to fiscal consolidation and debt sustainability. So in my view, I'd say that having an efficient procurement system should be right at the center of Kenya's fiscal consolidation efforts. We mentioned earlier that it's definitely not a silver bullet, but at the same time, if you compare the options that we have with the manual system and you compare that to the system that the EGP system and the transparency it provides and the reduced opportunities for fraud, I mean, given that fiscal consolidation would go a long way into helping us reduce our, reduce our debt obligations, then procurement reform should be right at the center.
10 minutes.
Is somebody, you please mute yourself? Yes, so procurement reforms should be right at the center of that debt conversation. So as I mentioned at the beginning, public procurement accounts for roughly over 60% of total public expenditure, meaning that even the smallest efficiency gains that we see or we can obtain would have some large impacts in terms of closing those fiscal leakages, the overpricing, the poor contract management where we lose a lot of money. And given that the National Treasury by itself has acknowledged that the most significant leakages occur through the manual procurement process. And the current as well as previous heads of the executive have also mentioned in the past that procurement accounts for significant, and this is also demonstrated in the audit reports, that procurement accounts for significant leakages, more than 2 billion a day. Then we know that with the current status that we have of our public debt, excuse me, I don't think it would be a stretch, in my view, to say that having an efficient procurement system is in fact a very useful debt management tool. So I'd like Leo to add as I look at whether you have any hands raised. Leo, you can add to anything I've forgotten.
Yes, so just to add to, so we've seen some estimates from, so the World Bank says by Kenya through the full enrollment rolling out of EGP and buying and agencies just buying like as some sort of cleanup with the procurement, the contract management and other and the tendering procedures, Kenya would save 60 billion shillings. The president's economic advisor on economic affairs estimates 150 billion shillings, and that's something that he mentioned in the. So there are significant savings to, but for me and the IE's view is that the bigger benefit is especially when the contract management is rolled out, so that a dam that was supposed to be done is completed, or textbooks that were supposed to be bought for children are bought for children. That is something that has more value, and not just questions about fiscal, because the public service delivery model in this country is something that is a problem. The way governors are copied the national government model on rent seeking and adopted it in the counties is a sorry state of affairs, especially. So the bigger procurement fraud at the national government is also getting to the lower devolved units. So the second question about bypass, that is what we are looking for. We are looking for that data because we've not seen, we've even tried to look at public the testimony by the National Treasury, even in Parliament regarding this. We've not been able to see who has powers to bypass or create exceptions within the system. So that's something that we are still following up, and frequently. The view, you look at the briefing paper, is that discretion should be a legal determination. It should not be something that any person of this stature, say appears, can create exceptions. That means we'll just be having the normal procurement system, but now in a digital format. So that exception system is something that the law should define, so that, and that also applies to the question about sanctions. Those are the things that we should have a set of regulations, that a set of amendments or laws that reflect this kind of, because we'll be addressed the sanctions here. So when somebody generates an AI, let me give a scenario. Look at this. If the contract module, contracting module, management module would be on, and then somebody actually generates an AI image of a building and says that this is an hospital that has been built in 𝐒𝐲𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬, in a village in 𝐒𝐲𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬. And then, so what crime would you be charging that person with? So we need a set of sanctions that actually envision the kind of the system that we have. And then also, there's a problem. There are more than 18 different types of, if you look at the Public Procurement Assets and Disposal Act, there are more than 18 different types of procurement, from open to force account to many others. There are many different kinds. How those, and they follow different processes, how they be viewed on the system. So there's a way that that Treasury needs to think about this more to allow that. So the last issue is that there is no compliance. The compliance is less than 1%. So that's not to belabor that point. Jackie has dealt with that. Compliance is less than 1%, because if you are looking at 500,000 contracts or 750,000 contracts by 3/4 of the year, and looking at what the National Treasury made that decision last year, that you'll see that, and you only have 3,000 contracts. That's a very small number. And then also, on the legal question, Treasury has powers on control of public money, constitutional powers. Treasury also has powers to set policy. The argument people should be making is on the question of other things like exceptions, like if Treasury violated powers. But the argument that Treasury cannot make a suggestion on the on advancing EGP is something that I find a problem with, and that should be that is the correct legal position. But to say that because an agency, say for example, is a commercial firm of government, or say an agency it's a devolved unit. That is not an argument. Those are not arguments, because policy questions in this respect are questions that national government was required to determine. They can argue practicality, they can argue many other things, but not that Treasury cannot. And so that's an important feature to just say. Back to you, Jackie. You are muted. You are muted.
Sorry, I think I was kicked out of the meeting for a minute. So thanks, Leo. Let's see, I'm still waiting to see if anyone wants to speak to any of the issues, or we can move on to the next comment. I still don't see any hand up. So there's a comment here by Olunga. Olunga says, I like the progress and idea of EGP. I think, though, the government should consider piloting, say, 30% departments and or tenders floated, deal with the teething issues, and give departments a year to fully onboard. Olunga, what's not clear to me with your question is, do you mean piloting, like only 30% of procuring entities to use, to be required to use this, or within an entity, like just, I mean, through, within, say, a state department, only 30% of its use in some instances? I don't know if you can unmute yourself and just ask the question clearly, or make the comment. And then I see Jaira says, who should be sanctioned for the missing contracts? Is it the National Treasury? Olunga, are you still here? Maybe you can unmute yourself and... Okay, I don't know. I think he's not here. Leo, would you like to attempt to respond first? Then I'll come in.
Yes. So Milton Friedman once said, in reference to a policy by the US government, that all the time the arguments that people would make was that this is a temporary program. This is temporary. But it ended up being a permanent program. And he was making an argument to persuade President Reagan. The US government had a program to buy cheese. So if you allow government agencies that this can be discretionary, that this can be temporary, this is a pilot. This is a pilot. That will never happen. When the act was passed in 2015, one of the requirements of the Public Procurement Assets and Disposal Act was that all contracts, all government contracts should be on a public platform, all of them. But because the idea that was given in the regulations was that this would be government would develop modalities within 3 years, nobody ever complied with that rule. And that even happened after the President Kenyatta issued an executive order. Nobody ever complied with that rule. So I don't think that government agencies, and especially this case accounting officers, should be given a chance to determine whether to comply or not to comply with the EGP. Because look at this, access of the platform can be accessed with an internet that can function on your phone. That is 2G level internet. So there can be no excuse about not advancing this. A question or limit should come from something else, but not the arguments that we've already seen. And that applies to what Jairus has asked. if you look at the PFM, the people who should be sanctioned for missing contracts are the accounting officers. So there's a definitional question in the law of who an accounting officer is. So every accounting officer of each agency should be asked, where are your contracts? So if, for example, it's for the ministry, it would be the PS, but also the CS as a matter of policy. Why are you not enforcing government policy? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Leo. So Olunga, I agree fully with Leo's take that the high risk with that is making this like a permanent. Procuring entities might take this as an indication that this would be a permanent way of doing things, and so allowing just 30% of the or phasing it out that way might just lead to will basically just prolong the process. Full implementation of the EGP has been attempted. Rollout of the EGP has been attempted for quite a while. There have been that discussion for quite some time. And so the best approach is basically to just have everyone on board and have the full requirement for full compliance. And then JIRAS, as Leo has said, the short answer to your question is basically no, because accounting officers are primarily responsible, even though the Treasury sets the policy directive. When it comes to compliance for any of those processes, then the accounting officers within the procuring entities have the full responsibility. I don't know if there's any other question. Yes, there are more questions. As we come to a conclusion, I still don't see any hand. So Bildad says, looking ahead 2 to 3 years, what would success for Kenya's EGP system look like in measurable terms? Then as a closing reflection, what is the single most critical reform? Is it legal, institutional, or technological that would make the system more transformative rather than compliant? And then Olunga says, as we are talking, there are still trainings going on for procurement officers. Yes, I'm well aware of that. I have attended the trainings, and the procedure is not very smooth. Testing, for example, how the banks are integrated to offer bank statements. Okay, thanks for that insight. So, yeah, so you're basically saying that, like, even the rollout, the trainings, first of all, are not sufficient. I'm sure this should be by PPRA, or is it by who's providing these trainings, or is it the National Treasury and the respective county departments? So I have also seen some PBO reports claiming that indeed there's a real challenge in terms of the rollout based on those capacities, and that counties have claimed that they have insufficient capacity to use the system. But I think the training should be ongoing as they roll out. Like, it should not be halt, we first finish, we take 2 years to train, or we take a year to train. I think as far as possible, the systems should run concurrently. The rollout of and trainings should all run concurrently. So yes, with Leo, would you like to start before I get to build that question?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So to Olunga's question about the trainings. So part of any system, the technology system has challenges. And we've seen in the past, government has adopted like eCitizen and other. The idea is those challenges will still be there. But as corrections, more integrations are made, the system becomes more better with time. Because remember the design of a system has to meet the human interface for that kind of feedback to emerge. So for me, I see it as a positive thing. The idea is that to keep those going so that those challenges emerge, and then they're provided. So for build, I'll just give one answer to build that. For me, I think the only thing that is required now, because for the first time, the executive has made such a proposal. The idea that is required now is that members of parliament, because part of the fight around MPs is that they control the procurement of CDF related projects. And that is a political economy problem that we've seen. So, and that's why the big fight with them about this. So part of the thing is, if that issue around members of parliament is figured out, and going by whether you go with the former prime minister's words, scrapping it off, or the constitutional position, which is the true position, that MPs are lawmakers and they are not supposed to execute any form of projects. That will allow members of parliament to work with National Treasury to advance rules around this procurement. Because what we are seeing now is, for the first time, an unlikely coalition has emerged, the coalition of counties and MPs agreeing on one single issue, which is something that, and this has stalled the process. So it's that question of parliament, so that all these other issues become process, administration, and procedure questions. Even the legal amendments, parliament can pass those legal amendments. But as soon as so long as MPs still control procurement of CDF related procurement, and they see this system as taking discretion away from them, the moving EGP will still be a problem. So, Jackie.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Leo. So yes, build that. Success for me would look like full compliance. In an ideal world, all the over 40,000 procuring entities are onboarded successfully and begin to use that EGP system. And that is not just an end to itself, but thinking again around why the system is useful at from the very start, and we know that that is basically to close those leakage gaps. So success would look like full onboarding, full utilization, and then closing those the leakages that we have talked about here elaborately that are linked to the manual procurement system. I think you're the same person. You are the same person who talked about the link to public debt, between the linkage between public debt and procurement. And so again, success would look like us using the procurement, having a procurement system that is so efficient that it helps the efforts towards fiscal consolidation. Then, as Leo has mentioned, the reforms that would be most critical. Right now, it looks like it's the legislative reforms. So, of course, bearing in mind those political economy constraints that Leo has talked about with regards to Parliament and the CDF and so on. But Parliament basically closing the gaps that have allowed for the system to be bypassed, so the gaps in the Procurement Act, and then subsequently a full shift to the EGP system. So that's it, because I do not see any other questions, and it's 4 minutes past our intended closing time. I'd like to ask Leo to make some very brief closing remarks, and then I will wrap this up. Leo.
Yeah. So for me, it's just to align political incentives. The technical readiness is something I think that is already demonstrated, and so that would be able to. But the general idea of EGP, taking away that discretion from accounting officers, is a great thing that has happened, that can happen to this country. And if you look at the public expenditure review that was published last year by World Bank, EGP is one of those. They had some scenarios on fiscal slippage, Kenya's fiscal slippage. And one of the things that they add is an implementation of EGP to give Kenya that breathing space of more than 60 to 90 billion shillings annually, which can be higher as the budgets grow. So from me, that is it. We wrote the briefing paper. It's a working paper. We'll as Jackie will say the next steps around that, and we look forward to engage with this. This is something you're tracking because as we learned from the IES Public Procurement Risk Index, procurement fraud is one of Kenya's single largest policy issue of this decade. And this should be something that government, members of parliament, Kenyan citizens alike, and other bodies who are interested in public affairs should deal with. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Leo. Yes, I echo those words that it's definitely one of the most significant policy issues that we are tracking and will continue to track. As part of the next steps I mentioned earlier, we intend to have a meeting with the National Treasury and also with the PPRA to discuss and see what they foresee as the next step, to share some of our policy recommendations and also to try and get a better picture of the challenges with the compliance right now as it is, even for the entities, the national government state entities. Yeah, so we will have a meeting with the National Treasury and with PPRA and Parliament in the coming weeks, and subsequently update our study. So we have a paper that the preliminary paper as it is will be availed in the course of next week. It will be available on our website, but this presentation that we've made here will be available immediately. Thank you all so much for sitting in through the hour and a half and for your useful engagement. We hope that this has also been useful to you, and please look out for other IEA engagements. We will have a couple of both physical as well as virtual engagements in the coming weeks. So please look out for those. So I've said the presentation will be available. For those of you who are not members of the IEA and are interested to join, please get in touch with our communications team. We'd love to have you as a member. Actually, the presentation has already been posted on the platform here. So if you're interested, you can just click on the link and you'll be able to download it. And yes, let us keep engaging on IEA social media sites. On Twitter, it's at IEA Kenya. And thanks again for engaging us. We thank you all for being here, and we also thank the UK Development Office for their support. Have a good afternoon, everyone.